Aloha, namaste. This is Radha Home, and I'm here with our 2023 forecast. So we have a lot of major changes and shifts happening in this year, and I'm going to go over each of the different transits that we're going to encounter. The first of the year begins with Mercury retrograde, so we're going to start there. And we have Saturn changing signs, we have Mars changing signs, we have Jupiter changing signs, we have the nodes changing signs later in the year, we have several eclipses. So we're going to go through each of these transits and briefly talk about them. In order to do this, I'm going to share my screen so we can see what is happening. We have, this is January 1st, so we're beginning the year with a bit of a haze. This actually transit of the moon joined Rahu is beginning on the 31st, so New Year's Eve. So we're really starting the year off with a bang. Rahu on the moon is going to bring a lot of illusion, a lot of exacerbation of feelings, and exaggeration of our feelings. Rahu has this quality of suspicion and this foreign nature. So we might see things very differently than they are, and we might assume things about people's feelings and emotions that might not be accurate. So it's really important to to be mindful where we're spraying our energy. Bharani, the star that this is in, and the star that Rahu's in, period. So this is really has to do with something that Rahu has been bringing us and will continue to bring us for some time around spraying out our creative energy. Rahu is a very airy Vata energy, and in the sign of Aries, it's very fiery. So we have this tendency to send our fire out in many directions. And Bharani is the star of creation. It's indicated by the female yoni, and it is ruled over by Yama, the Lord of Death. So we have this sort of life and death quality to this star and this portal through which things are born. And so when we, make our New Year's resolutions, and then many people tend to go out or have some kind of social function on New Year's Eve, we might find that we're setting into motion this sort of chaotic beginning. And really the whole first week of the new year has that energy of lack of discernment and then moving into anger as the moon joins Mars. So I'm gonna not spend too much time on something as quick as a moon transit, but it is potent because it's how the year is beginning, right? It's where our first glimpse of like, can we accomplish our New Year's resolutions? And it's like right off the bat, we're all, overemphasizing how we feel, and perhaps overemphasizing or assuming things about how other people feel. And of course, we also have Mercury retrograde. This transit began on the 30th or 29th actually of December. So we have started already. We've already been in this Mercury retrograde by the time the new year starts, and it moved back into Sagittarius on the 30th. So we see that our communication is going to need some revision, right? We might have come out of this cycle with Mercury and Sagittarius really feeling confident about our beliefs and how we communicate those beliefs, maybe feeling a little self-righteous at times about the things we believe and the way in which we discern what is true and what is not true. And Mercury is like, oh, wait, hang on. You didn't get that right the first time. We need to go back and do that again. And this will be particularly potent for, Gemini rising and Virgo rising, since it's their ruling planet. It's like where their energy is focused is going to have to rerun everything that just occurred. But on that same note, right before the new year begins, Venus has moved out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn, where we have an opportunity to be more grounded and more practical in our relationships. Particularly the closer Venus gets to Saturn, we might feel fear around our relationships, and we can sometimes find that fear turns into like a control of trying to prevent the ultimate death we feel in relationships, which is somebody leaving us or somebody perhaps dying. Or an aloneness that we might feel, a loneliness we feel in relationship. So it's important to, work with the energy of humility and commitment and being willing to show up for the hard work with another person. as opposed to focusing on just the stress and the fear and the worry. So as we move into, and I'm going to, move our dates along as we talk, we can see that on the 2nd, the moon is going to join Mars, and we'll have, perhaps some of that latent fire, that anger that Mars has been building up. This has been a transit of Mars in Taurus since August of 2022. And this is a very long haul for Mars. Mars doesn't usually stay in a sign this long. Usually it's more closer to 3 months. So this very long cycle of Mars in Taurus has been teaching us a lot about our anger, particularly our anger as it relates to other people keeping us from our discipline. The reason is because Taurus is ruled by Venus, and there's a quality of wanting to get along and have pleasure, particularly in the Taurus part of Venus, as opposed to the Libra part of Venus. We want our own self-pleasure, right? We want to feel good. And sometimes we give that to ourselves through food, through, taking a bath, perhaps, maybe gardening, cooking, artistic endeavors, any kind of thing that might bring us peace and ease and comfort and stability. But sometimes we're choosing that over discipline, courage, and individuation, which is what Mars represents. So when Mars is in this placement of Taurus, we tend to feel like we're not being disciplined enough. And sometimes we blame that on other people because they're the ones we're trying to get pleasure from. We're trying to enjoy, sensual activities with another person. We're trying to enjoy friendships or food with another person or multiple other people. And we end up, feeling like all that pleasure and fun is keeping us from our discipline, when in fact it's us, we're making that choice. So the answer really is to, and I should say, particularly since Mars has been retrograde, we've been having to sort of deal with this as an internal experience. So internally feeling like like we should be more disciplined, but we're not. And maybe not even having those sort of Taurian outputs of our physical energy, like maybe gentle yoga or gentle walks or gardening or cooking or sex. These kind of things are Taurus Mars behavior that is not getting as much output either because it's retrograde, it's internalized. So the fire, the volcano, is inside, burbling up, and we're not seeing it on the outside as much. We're holding it in. So our anger isn't necessarily coming out in clear ways. It's coming out perhaps in passive aggressive ways, or just by shutting other people out and then finding that we're still not disciplined on our own. So the moon joining Mars is going to really highlight that within our emotions. The moon is our mind and it's our emotions. So wherever it goes, and of course it's moving all the time, we can't talk about every moon transit in this particular report. I just wanted to start us off with sort of understanding how the year is beginning. This latent anger can be here, and then coupled with Mercury, this can be challenging because we can see there's a one-way drishti. Mars gives a one-way 8-house drishti to Mercury and the sun here. And so particularly when we talk about Mercury being retrograde and Mars is retrograde, this is a lot of things left unsaid. This is a lot of, built up energy that's delayed or, not immediately reactive, but creating tension within. And our communication might be fumbled. Perhaps we don't get the message that someone sends us to apologize, or perhaps we don't, understand it. It's confusing. The word choice is jumbled. Perhaps we're, our internet breaks down or something like that, or our computer breaks down and we're unable to get across the communication we need to get across. And not just in interpersonal relationships, but in, business relations and in all areas. So Mercury retrograde tends to create a lot of confusion for people because we do live in a very communicative world. Right? We live in a world that's focused, hyper-focused on the mental and on the amount we need to communicate with others. And considering it rules over things like computers and phones and things that we really use quite a bit in our current society, it creates stress, worry, confusion for people when Mercury is retrograde. And Mercury is going to be retrograde until the 18th of January. So this will be an ongoing theme and lesson we'll be learning. But within that cycle of Mercury turning retrograde, Mercury's retrograde cycle. We'll also see Mars go direct on the 12th of January. So I'm going to, move us forward. And just to finish this first week a little bit, we have the 2nd, and we move into the 5th. And actually, it might even be sooner than that. Pretty much on the 5th. We have late in the, later in the evening on the 4th. And of course, this is Hawaii time, which is GMT -10. It's 2 hours behind Pacific Daylight Time in this moment. And then when daylight savings time happens for the mainland US, Hawaii does not honor that. So we end up being 3 hours different from Pacific Daylight Time. And I try to use that as an anchor for people since Hawaii is a little more obscure. But we will have this also happening in this first week, right? Where Mercury retrograde is right across from the moon in Mercury's sign of Gemini. So this will really highlight our miscommunications. It's also where our full moon is. It's going to be the full moon, the first full moon of the new year, where we really see that opposite energy of our beliefs, right? The new moon in Sagittarius is like, these are my beliefs, and I think they're right, or I need to uproot them because it was in the star of Mula, the root. And here we are trying to plant new seeds with the sun in Purvashada and Mercury as well, but Mercury's retrograde. So we're needing to go back over old ground and make sure that our discernment, what we think and how we determine what is true and what is not true, is coming from a place that is founded on solid beliefs. So kind of a tricky start to our new year. This will bring us into a few days into the new year too. So later on the 7th, we'll see that we move out of Gemini and the moon moves into Cancer, and that's her own sign. So we start to have some more peace within our feelings and maybe some reflection and capacity to have compassion for others in their struggles as well. So it will end on a more peaceful note, but it begins with a bit of an agitation. Which, when we talk about starting off the new year, we can really see how starting off on the wrong foot tends to put people in a flurry, because people place a lot of importance on this first day of the year and on this New Year's, and it's really a Gregorian date. It's not related to the new moon cycles. It's not even related to the solstice or the start of spring, which is another new year. Some people calculate the new year by the solstice, and some by the equinox and by the start of spring, which is the new season that really brings in birth and growth and regeneration. The dead of winter is a time that is, more dead and less growth possible, right? It's a lot of endings. And the beginning of the year really has been given this quality just by the arbitrary nature of our Gregorian calendar. Yet millions and millions of people place a lot on the start of the new year and their new calendar beginning and their New Year's resolutions and all the things that they think are going to happen. And this agitation can be really challenging. It is a great time, though, to begin physical exercise. So if your New Year's resolution is to, engage in more physical health, that's a wonderful way to get through that first week. Getting up and exercising every day can really help to mitigate some of the anger that's latent and help you feel more solid within yourself and like other people aren't taking your energy. And also it's a wonderful time for, really becoming clear with yourself about the ways you keep your own self from your courage, from your discipline, the things you need to do, and maybe writing out some some clear-cut plan for yourself of what you want to accomplish, where you want to go, and things like that. So we move into the 12th, which is where Mars goes direct. And I'm going to have to move the hours to get us there. Here we go. We have Mars direct in Rohini and Taurus. And so now all that latent energy that's been building up, all that anger that's been beneath the surface might come out, right? This is the star Rohini in particular has to do with our sensuality and our desire nature. And so maybe, this can come out by expressing passion in a way that, you've been holding in. This can come out as whatever house Taurus is for you really being activated, or whatever house ruler Mars is for you. So whichever houses Mars rules for you, really having some forward action, some actual manifestation when it's been building up and not actually manifesting since the retrograde cycle. So these are important things to understand, the difference between a forward motion and the retrograde motion, which the retrograde started in October 30th, and Mars actually jumped for 1 month from Gemini, or into Gemini, and then back again into Taurus during that retrograde cycle. So that's why we had such a long bout of Mars in Taurus. So direct motion with our anger, and it will still be reflecting onto this Mercury retrograde, and Mercury will be in close degrees. You know, there's only a couple degrees apart. So we might see that the anger suddenly lashes out, but the communication is still in delay. And then on the 18th, we have, you know, Mercury go direct as well. And the sun at this point will be in Capricorn. So in general, we'll feel more humility, but we'll also feel a lack of power as the sun moves into Capricorn. So let's get us to the 18th here so we can see Mercury coming into direct. So communication clear, very, I mean, almost exact, right? This drishti of Mars on Mercury. So communication is suddenly very clear. One of the things about Mercury being retrograde, particularly in a sign like Sagittarius, where we don't have the best communication. In Sagittarius, our communication tends to be very dogmatic and belief-oriented, and not as human, not as clear and organized, and the facts are not as important. The details are not as important. What's most important is that we're right. And this can get us in a lot of trouble. And it probably did, as Mercury was direct in Sagittarius for the past few weeks, you know, leading up to this retrograde cycle. And then we have to go back over it and learn something. So the hope is that we learn something. The hope is that these retrograde cycles of Mars and Mercury, we learned something in. Because actually, in these signs where they're not operating with as much intelligence, the retrograde action helps delay us. It helps us think before we speak with Mercury. It helps us internalize the anger instead of outputting it with Mars. And that's really important, because if we just are reactive without thinking, then that's when trouble really occurs. You know, maybe it's good that someone didn't get that email, right? If the email was full of sort of passive aggressive anger or blame or whatever, you know, ways that we poorly communicate. So this could be an opportunity to really come forward with clear direction because we really listened in those retrograde cycles and really learned something. Or this could be an opportunity to, you know, finally kill that thing that we were trying to, you know, that we were holding in too much and not getting out before. So it really depends on your own level of intelligence with these planets and what cycles you're running as far as how this will affect you. But this forward motion can actually be quite intense, especially if you look at the day when it happens. We have Mars directly across from the moon as well. So internally, we'll be feeling that anger. And the moon is debilitated in Scorpio. So it'll be several days leading up where the moon was joined K2. We might be feeling pulled away from our feelings in this sort of disgruntled, disinterested, and even disgusted feeling, which of course is within ourselves, but because it's in the sign of Libra, we feel it towards other people. And then moving into the debilitation where we feel it's depression, we feel it's anxiety, all these ups and downs, all this fear, which is really what the depression comes from. And then boom, you know, Mars is looking at it, which is actually a positive thing because Mars is giving drishti to his own sign. So there's this quality of courage that can come in where we face our fears, but there's also that quality where Mars is in Taurus and we might blame other people for it. And then the drishti on Mercury direct, all those things that you wanted to say before, but you didn't say. So if you really can spend the retrograde period learning better communication, practicing ways to speak where you own what you feel, then you'll have a lot better luck in this direct period. And we have, before Mars moves out of, and actually the day before this, look, Saturn moved the day before this. I missed the Saturn transit in that, so I'll go back a day. Mercury is still retrograde, but Saturn is moving into Aquarius on January 17th. And this is huge. Saturn has been in Capricorn, in sidereal Capricorn, since January of 2020. Very long time. And I think we can all remember what happened in January of 2020, right? The world ended. Everything changed. Everything as we knew it became altered. And we all became hyper fixated on our fear, on death, and on our aloneness, right? I mean, literally what happened was we were all told that we were going to die and we had to stay home and be alone in our homes or, with your immediate family. And this fear started to come out from all different sides, fear about the pandemic itself, fear about the restrictions being put on us, fear from every angle really came into the picture. And for many people, deep depression, it was depressing to experience such a massive shift in our way of life. And as the 3 years have passed, we've had some mobility on that. Particularly last year, Saturn dipped into Aquarius for a couple months and then retrograded back into Capricorn. So we had an opportunity to sort of feel some of the movement already that we are going to experience now for the next 2 years. But it's very important that we note within ourselves when these shifts happen, because we can then realize what we went through and what's possible now, instead of holding on to the past, instead of being stuck there. Saturn is in his own signs in both of these places, in Capricorn and in Aquarius. And so there's a lot of intelligence running. A lot of the fear was very real fear, things we should actually be afraid of. A lot of the feeling of aloneness was there to teach us that ultimately, as much as we love other people and as much as we need other people, we are alone. We come here alone, and we have a mother and a father, hopefully, and we have, maybe other humans around us, but we pass through that portal of life and death alone. And we need to make peace with that. And Saturn is teaching us to find peace. Particularly in Capricorn, it's about finding peace. In Aquarius, there's more movement because it's an air sign. It's more in the mind. There's a futuristic quality, and the quality of time shifts, because in Capricorn, time is like pressure, like we need to get the next thing done to survive. In Aquarius, time is futuristic, and we can move beyond time. We can use our intellect to imagine other dimensions, to imagine that our quality of time is not necessarily inherent, but actually dependent, right? Variable, like Einstein's theory on relativity. It's not the same amount of time, even though it might be calculated the same way. It feels different. Our experience of time can be very different. And anyone who's ever meditated knows that time literally expands when we choose to go inward, when we choose to start off our day in this way where we sit with ourselves in silence, alone, with our eyes closed, usually. We create more space and time. It becomes relative, and we understand it that way. But of course, people can understand that through all kinds of things, whether you have a passion that you love to do, and when you're doing it, it feels very different. Or when you're in love with someone, that amount of time that passes can feel very different. Or if you're at work, it can feel really different, waiting for the time clock to tick. If you're waiting for anything, you feel time can feel like forever, right? But in a painful way, not in a beautiful way, where it can feel like forever in a beautiful way when you're in love. So this quality of time really shifting into Saturn, and it shifts through this star Dhanista, which is shown by a drum, where we are meting out time. We are feeling time in these beats and these epochs. And it's also a star that can bring a lot into reality. And it's interesting because it's moving from the earth sign, which is the material, into the air sign, which is the intellect. So, from a more literal standpoint, we would think, well, wouldn't we first imagine something and then bring it into manifestation on the earth plane? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. In Aquarius, we're taking what's already been, the old ways of doing things, the tangible earth-bound sort of tamasic energy, which is the lower vibration that holds us to the earth, that keeps us where we are. And it allows us to expand through the mind. The only thing that allows us to move beyond our animalistic brain, our reptilian brain, is that capacity to see something different, to imagine something different, and to use our intellect to literally change our course, change our mind about something, see it differently, choose a different reality. And that's really a lot of what Aquarius offers us, is the capacity to choose something different. Now, it's based on fear because it's Saturn, and it's based in Aquarius on seeing what's wrong in many ways with society, particularly as Saturn moves into Satyabhishek. We'll see that, seeing what is not right, what is corrupt, what ways the system works to feed the king across the way here in Leo, and not the peasants over here in Aquarius, not the little people. So we can see a commitment to these ideals of the every person, of everyone, and fairness, the little people getting their share, and moving out of this place of the fear that keeps the little people down. So again, using that intellect, and it's a social sign. It's the natural 11th house, which is community and society. So we can see that big, huge shift happening. And that is going to be there until March of 2025. So just a little over 2 years, we'll have Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn transits for about 2.5 years. And he did in Capricorn as well. But like I said, there was that little step into Aquarius and then back into Capricorn. It's a little bit longer this time in Capricorn. When we see a step in and then go back to that same energy, we don't feel it. The movement didn't happen, right? It happens for a minute, we feel it, and then we go right back to where we were. We don't have that clear delineation of something different having been. Similar to how Mars kind of jumped into Gemini and then went back. It didn't. You just get a glimpse, you just get a taste, but you don't get, there's not enough time to cultivate anything changing, particularly with Saturn. The reason Saturn transits for so long, well, not the reason Saturn transits for so long because of how far away it is from the sun, but the experience we have of that transit is one where it takes a long time to learn the lessons that Saturn is teaching us. Very quick with the moon, our mind is always moving on to the next thing. Similarly, Mercury and Venus are moving quickly. The sun is staying still, but we're experiencing it as moving also very quickly, more in line with Mercury and Venus. So these are lessons that are happening quickly, but Saturns are long and hard won, and there's retrograding and going back over, and this is sort of oil pressing quality that Saturn brings, where we feel very almost, we can almost feel dead inside, or like giving up when he's done with us. There's this quality of like nihilism that occurs, where it's like, what's the point? And in a way, that's what he's teaching us. He's teaching us the opposite of what Jupiter's teaching us. Jupiter's teaching us hope and optimism. Saturn's teaching us that nothing matters, and that the more we are attached to the things of this world, the more disappointment we'll experience. And it's a truth that we need to learn, despite it not being the most fun truth to experience. So after January 17th, we move into our next major transit is in March. And March 12th, we have Mars moving into Gemini. This is going to bring up for us some of the same issues that we kind of visit during the Mercury retrograde, with the moon right across from it, and Mars giving drishti to that Mercury retrograde, because Gemini is Mercury's sign. It's communication. It's where we are flexible with our ideas normally, where we want to take in a lot of information and also disseminate out a lot of information. It's where we want to have ideas. It's the first house of the I identity. Gemini is the natural third house, so it has to do with the ego, with the ahamkara, where we are discovering our own identity, our own self. And this star, Mrigashira, that takes it from Taurus into Gemini is the one where we do that. It's the searching star, where we're like, okay, family life is great, and possessions are good and everything we're doing is all fine and dandy and I feel good, but what else is there out there? What else can I imagine? There must be more. And it takes us into this restlessness of Gemini. One of the issues that happens is we moving from an earth to an air sign is what we have less of a physical output of our Mars energy. And Mars is physicality, it's action. It comes into anger because we're not taking enough action. Mars is exalted in an earth sign. It's exalted in Capricorn, where we have a clear, direct line of action with a finish point, an end game called survival. And Mars will lay those bricks or do whatever it needs to do to build that house so that we have somewhere to live. It will lay the conceptual bricks of our future and have a pathway somewhere. In Gemini, there's no pathway. Gemini is all over the place. It's where we're very confused because we have too much information, right? We can be unconfused in Gemini, depending on what planets are there. Like Mercury operates very well in his own sign, obviously. But Mars brings us to a place with our ideas and with our thoughts and with our communication that becomes very Marsian, very black and white, right, wrong, yes, no, good, bad. And this can cause a lot of havoc in our life because everything is not so clear cut and black and white. There's a lot of nuance. And normally Gemini is where we operate with a lot of nuance. We have a lot of understanding around that nuance. We have a flexibility, a curiosity, and we're able to, take that curiosity and explore the next idea, explore the next thing. Now it can get jumpy like a cat. It can be like, okay, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. And, we end up down all these different rabbit holes, particularly in the internet age. But the fact that Mars is there also means that, we're going to feel anger just by the fact that we're not getting enough physical output of our anger. We're going to be putting it out in a more mental way, which is never the healthiest to do. And we can see at this time also, Mercury and the sun are now joined Saturn here in Aquarius, but Venus has now come in at this time to join Rahu in Aries. And Venus and Aries can also be very selfish in relationship. We can be very self-focused in relationship and angry also, because Venus is where, Aries is where we want to be strong and individuate. And Venus is where we're trying to relate to other people. So we can become very willful, like this is what I want to do and I don't care how it affects other people. And we can become aggressive and not as accommodating as Venus would like. So that coupled with Mars in Gemini can create some relational challenges that come up. Our next big date that we come into is our solar eclipse. It's our first eclipse of the year, and let's see how far I need to go forward. We'll go till April 19th. So we have the solar eclipse here, moon and sun in Ashwini, joining Rahu and Mercury in our new moon. And this eclipse, it's not a new axis, right? Again, we're working with the Gregorian calendar when we talk about 2023. The nodal axis began in March of 2022. So this is a year into this. We've been here before. We've seen this. We've done this. We've done the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse where the sun is in Aries, and we've done the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse where the sun is in Libra. We've experienced these before, but when we experienced it before, it was a new transit. Now we've had this whole year to think about our selfishness versus our accommodation. And for many people, we're too accommodating. And Rahu in Aries is an opportunity to learn to be more selfish, to learn to do things as you desire and on your own agenda. And for other people, they might already have a bent towards being selfish. And this has been bringing them more into that and pulling away even more from harmony. And certainly on the world stage and in society at large, we can see how the pull away from grace, harmony, diplomacy, and things like that could be detrimental to our society, and the selfishness cause issues in our world, because Rahu is where we're going. It's where we want to go. It's where we're obsessed, really. But now that we've had some time to mature with this and to learn, maybe we've learned some lessons. This star, Ashwini, is the first star. It's the first nakshatra, and it's the star of the physicians of the gods, the Ashwin twins. And it indicates a place where we might be setting out on something. We also need to corral our energy, similar to Bharani, where we need to corral the creative energy. Here we need to make sure that we're not just setting out in too many directions and going so strong that we're not keeping our horses together, right? They need to stay together. Having Mercury here, despite it being in a different star and a little bit later degrees, shows us how, again, the communication is being very highlighted here, particularly because Mars and Mercury are now in an exchange of signs in this solar eclipse. So we're going to see how the intelligence of one can offer how the lack of intelligence in each other's signs, Mercury being a little too short, a little too curt, a little too black and white, and Mars and Gemini, which I already discussed, can offer each other intelligence in each other's signs. When there's an exchange of signs, we see that Mars gives courage and discipline to Mercury, and Mercury offers flexibility and intellect to Mars. So we have some help here through this alignment. This is also the new moon that sets off Akshaya Tritiya, which is the most blessed day of the year, because it's when the luminaries are exalted. So the sun is actually exalted here in Aries, and the moon is exalted in Taurus. And so as we move forward a couple days, we have Akshaya Tritiya. Tritiya is the third phase of the moon. So it's Tritiya when it's a waning moon, and it's Tritiya when it's a waxing moon. But of course, this is the waxing moon because it's the new moon. So we're moving to bright, and we move into the days when the moon is exalted. Early degrees of Taurus is the exact exaltation point in the star of Kritika. Kritika is actually a star that's ruled by the sun, but the story around Kritika has to do with the birth of Mars. And it's the Pleiades, as many of us are familiar with, and there's a lot of lore around that. But in the Vedic lore, the story is these divorced, cut off, Kritika means to cut, these wives of the sages who've been cast off to the stars because they've been perceived as being adulterous towards their husbands, despite that not being true. There was a nymph named Swaha who embodied each of these wives and made love to Agni, the god of fire, she was in love with Agni, but she received his semen and deposited it in a lake. And at the same time, Shiva and Parvati's lovemaking deposited a seed that went through many different channels, including Bhumdevi, the earth, and the Ganga river, to get to this same place, the same lake that that Agni, fire's seed, was in. And from this boiling cauldron of Shiva meets fire and all these different mothering energies involved, and this deceit that began it, Mars is born, Kartikeya, and he's the warrior who ends up conquering the demon Tarakasura after 7 days. After 7 days of life, that's who is called upon to be the warrior. And so this is a place where we're able to conquer our mind. We're able to cut through the illusion. We're able to cut through our emotions and see clearly. Fire is an element where we see. And so it's the reason the moon is exalted here. And we can see Venus is joined in her own sign. So a lot of intelligence running with our Venus, a lot of grace, a lot of pleasure available, a lot of happiness available, as we're able to feed our happiness through food. through sensual experiences, through calm, grounded energy. The moon is exalted in Taurus for that reason as well. It's that calm, grounded, I'm just going to do this thing and this thing and this thing, and that's going to help me feel okay, as opposed to that Scorpio energy where we're all wild and tumultuous and have a lot of fear and projection. So Akshaya Tritiya is happening, and look what else happens as we move into Akshaya Tritiya. We have Jupiter move into Aries. So Jupiter has spent a year in Pisces and is now making his transition into sidereal Aries. And we will see, Jupiter is obviously in very good dignity in his own sign of Pisces. There's also a very watery element there. It's where we're really merging with everything, and we're sort of taking away the lines of our beliefs and really finding hope and inspiration in this emotional way and in this fantastical way where we feel one with God, one with Source. In Aries, there's more fire, right? There's a plan, there's a game plan, and a lot of it has to do with our physical energy and how we manage it, and how we build courage, and how we build discipline. Discipline is doing something again and again and again in repetition. And you do it when you feel good. So when you don't feel good, you still show up, right? Anyone who's ever had a physical program, whether it's a yoga practice or whether it's some other thing that you do it all the time, and you've gotten so used to feeling good. It's the same as somebody who's addicted to feeling bad. Same as somebody drinking coffee every morning, or, alcohol every night, or whatever other feelings, eating McDonald's every day, whatever the thing is. It's like you've gotten used to that feeling, and it feeds something in your brain. Well, Jupiter in Aries can give us a lot of physical energy and a capacity to commit to our physical practices and to see the wisdom in doing, in our action. Ultimately, our action creates our karma. So if our action is not happening, we tend to have anger. And sometimes it's very passive aggressive, which is why Mars is debilitated in Cancer, because there's a lot of passive aggression occurring. But here we have an opportunity to use our beliefs, use our ideals, use our teachings to become more courageous, to become stronger, and to become more individuated, more strong within ourselves. And so this is happening on the same day as we have Akshaya Tritiya. For the start of Akshaya Tritiya, it's really kind of a 2-day affair because the moon stays in Taurus for 2 days. But this is the point when the moon is the most exalted, is in this, this first day. And Mercury begins retrograde again. Let me see exactly when Mercury, yep, it's on the exact same day that it begins, the 21st. So we have Jupiter changing signs, Mercury retrograde, and this blessing of the sun and moon being in their most illumined space. The sun and the moon are luminaries. In Vedic astrology, we call them grahas. Graha means to grab. It's the planetary energy and the gravitational pull that implants the energy to us here on Earth. But the grahas are not all planets, right? The sun and the moon are the luminaries. Rahu and Ketu are the nodes of the moon. They're the Chaya graha, the shadow planets that we only see during eclipses. And that was an eclipse that set off the Akshaya Tritiya. It wasn't just a regular new moon. Any new moon that happens in Aries leads us into Akshaya Tritiya, but this year, that's our nodal axis. So it was beyond that, and a close degrees one, nonetheless, close to our sun. So, fully eclipsing our power and our authority in its exalted place. So it was powerful, right? It was a power that the power that's getting eclipsed is full power. It's its highest power, and it's being eclipsed. And now we're moving into this state of exaltation with the moon also, but the node is still there eclipsing our power. So it's going to be a different Akshaya Tritiya. The blessings are still there because nothing ever really negates something. It's just that it's another layer added on. And it's why people get confused through, the nuance of learning about astrology, because there are so many layers and we have a tendency to want to conflate everything. We have a tendency to want to get like a neat little package in a one sentence that says this is how it's going to be, and not want to understand all the complexities, particularly when Mars is in Gemini. We want right, wrong, good, bad. Tell me if it's good. Tell me if it's bad. Well, it's nuanced. And we need to be able to hold all of that, to truly understand and to truly receive the light of Jyotish, of this science of light. So good and bad for those in that mindset. The switch of Jupiter out of his own sign, he's moving into positive dignity also here, but he was in his own sign before. So less peace, more agitation in our beliefs. But agitation is also movement. Maybe we got lazy here. Maybe we got too dreamy, too fantastical, too like, oh, everything's one, we're all one, and we don't have to do anything in this world, but we're in these bodies and we have to do something. Jupiter in Aries is going to do something. Sun being eclipsed by Rahu, it's like obsession with power, really. It's an eclipse of the power that makes us anxious, like we don't have power and we need to get power and we need more power. And, on a world stage, that can be frightening. On a personal stage, it really depends on your own level of development. And we do have this blessing of Mars and Mercury in each other's signs to offer a little more intelligence, because otherwise these two would be causing a lot more issue. But the retrograde, that will also cause issues, right? But it's in Aries. So it'll cause that delay I was talking about, where when Aries, we speak too fast. Mercury in Aries, we speak too fast, too blunt, too harsh. When we have it retrograde, maybe we slow down a little. Maybe that email doesn't get sent. Maybe that text message doesn't get sent. Maybe we can take a little more time with our thoughts before we speak them. So big change. April 21st is a big day for many reasons. That big long transit of Jupiter changing, Akshaya Tritiya, and Mercury beginning yet another retrograde cycle. So the next thing that we have, and this one will last until May 14th. This Mercury retrograde will last until May 14th. And Jupiter will be in Aries until May 2024. So again, it's a year-long transit that will be entering upon a very big thing. And when these periods come, when Saturn changes signs, when Jupiter changes signs, I do reports for all 12 signs. So we'll have a breakdown where you can really see what it's activating for you, what house Aries is, what houses Jupiter rules, these kind of things, because it's very important. It's not just about Jupiter and Aries. It's about what does Jupiter rule for you? What house is it for you? It will make a massive difference as far as what unfolds in your life from this. So 2 weeks after our solar eclipse, we have our lunar eclipse. And our lunar eclipse is where the moon is joined K2 and Rahu is still with the sun, although now the sun is past degrees of Rahu. Rahu and K2 move backwards. There are karmic points. Rahu's where we're obsessing, K2's where we're pulling away from, where we feel like we already know everything. In the story of the nodes, Rahu is a head, it's a mouth, just taking in, but nothing to assimilate because it's cut off from its lower body. K2 is that lower body, the neck down to a tail of all that past life information, all that wisdom, all that knowledge that we carry. But there's no head, there's nothing to engage in the world. There's just that tail pointing at the one thing that's wrong, and that makes us feel disgust. And there's like an internal gaze, just like if somebody has surgery, they feel that piece that's missing. It's the same thing. There's this piece missing that's felt, but not used. And it creates an internal energy. And that's what K2 does. So K2 on the moon can be very intense. It's like diving deep into our feelings, but being disgusted by them and seeing what's wrong with them. And the moon in Libra is bringing up relationships and others. How is our selfishness and our quest for power pulling us away from feeling accommodation, harmony, happiness, love, and relationships? And we'll be experiencing that. Now you can see the degrees are much farther for this eclipse. The moon will actually be at 2103 on the exact point of the eclipse, and K2 is at 952. So it's not as close. That was more of a total solar eclipse, and this is going to be a little bit farther off. So it won't be direct, but we'll be having that opposite energy. And we can see here that Venus at this point has moved into Gemini. right? Joining Mars. Venus actually does quite well in Gemini because we have that accommodating quality. There's more of an intellectual quality in our relationships. They're not as physical as they are in Taurus. And there's not as much about pleasure and enjoyment, but there's a lot more about communication. Well, Mercury is still retrograde in this period, so the communication might still be lacking a little. And Venus and Mars joining creates a fire in relationships. We see some agitation just from that itself. So that's our lunar eclipse, and that's happening on May 5th. So then if we go 1 week later, we'll see Mars has now moved into Cancer, and I want to find the exact date that happens. Mars moves into Cancer on the 9th of May. So this is where Mars is debilitated. Mars has a lot of trouble in Cancer because of what I was sort of alluded to before, where there's that passive aggression. We're not feeling like being individualized in Cancer. We're feeling like connecting to anything, like we're like needy in Cancer, right? We're unconditionally loving. Mars wants to be strong and courageous and an individual, and the moon is like mothering it, and oh, you don't need to exercise, oh, you know, just cry. And so our anger comes out in tears, it comes out in emotional expressions, and it comes out in passive aggression. It's like fighting through pillows, I say. So this is going to be a challenge in many ways for us. And we can see that the day it happens, thankfully, the moon's at late degrees because Mars would be giving drishti onto this moon, but it's very late degrees, so we won't experience too much intensity from that. But the day before, if we go back to when Mars was here, this is when we will feel it more. There won't be an exact drishti though, because Mars is moving in before the moon gets to those late degrees where he is here. So it's the 7th house drishti is a mutual drishti. When the planets are across from each other, they all give drishti. The outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, give one-way drishtis, and Mars is an 8th house one. So we won't feel too much agitation from it because of the degrees, but we will feel some of that anger right before Mars moves. And as Venus has moved in just a little bit closer to Mars, we might feel that. So Mars move back to Mars in Cancer. This is our next transit. And then Mercury will end retrograde on the 14th. So we'll have our communication back intact. But again, in Aries, direct communication. Let's hope we learn something in the retrograde period. Let's hope we learn something when Mars and Mercury were in exchange of signs so that we're not too direct, so we're not too intense. At this point, Jupiter is also inching closer to the node. So Jupiter, you know, our obsession with our beliefs and our beliefs around physicality and our beliefs around courage and our beliefs around individuation can get very strong here. This can be very intense. Also, we see that Saturn is giving drishti to this Jupiter now here in Aries. And Saturn's one-way drishti is a 3-house drishti. So there's a quality of fear that comes in, you know, from Saturn. Now it's in Aquarius, it's in its own sign. And like I said, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of potential. There's also a capacity for commitment. So we might really commit ourselves to our beliefs around strengthening ourselves and how that will affect society. Because again, this is in Aquarius. And now we're in Satyabhishak. So it's where we have 100 stars looking at all the things that are not always right in the world. Satyabhishak is the 100 healers, but it's also, so it's a star that has to do with Ashwini, actually. These two together have a lot to do with Ayurveda and healing. And together they can create a lot of power in that world, in the world of physical healing. And also Satyabhishak is the stars at night that see what needs social healing, the social healing that needs to happen. So I imagine that there'll be some things that come out in the world and in society about what needs to be healed, and perhaps around the medical world and the corruption in it, and how we need to self-strengthen, self-empower, because Jupiter's in Aries and Rahu's getting more and more obsessed with those beliefs, right? How we need to take care of ourselves. And Mercury's joined, so there can be some powerful words spoken, particularly as this direct action takes place. So then the next thing is Saturn going retrograde in June. So we have, I'll move forward a month and then a couple days. June 17th, we have Saturn retrograde. Saturn is, like I said, that thing that teaches us something over a long period of time. So his retrograde cycles are also quite long. And this one's going to last until November 4th. It's a long time, right? It's 5 months, just like, wow, okay, we get it. Whatever we thought we were committed to, whatever we thought we understood, whatever we were, working towards and putting our energy into, we start to question. So whatever house this is for us, it's going to be very important. It's also Saturn's house, along with this one. For Leo people, that will have to do with relationships, For Aquarius people, it'll have to do with themselves. So again, I'll have reports for that. When Saturn goes into Aquarius, I'll do a report for that, and I'll touch on the retrograde part as well. But this is a rethinking of our commitments, and it's an important thing that we need to do. We need to rethink our commitments. We don't just, we put our time into something, we get excited about something. We're like, this is the new world order I'm creating, with Saturn and Aquarius. And then it's like, well, actually, maybe I didn't see everything perfectly clear. Maybe there was a few things that don't deserve my time, don't deserve my energy, or are tiring me out, or making me feel even like I care less. And so Saturn retrograde period allows us to really think about that. And we see at this point, Jupiter has actually passed the node, has actually passed Rahu. So the level of obsession over our beliefs is starting to dissipate. And Mercury has now moved into Taurus. There's a quality of wanting to get along through our communication. And Sun, Moon, and Gemini, this is going to be a new moon in Gemini. And that's really going to create a desire for truth and using our intellect, our buddhi, our discernment to understand things better. So we're not just zealoting about our beliefs, and we're not just committing to some new future without fully understanding it. So it's a time of questioning what we've been doing in many ways. And again, we see Venus and Mars collecting here in Cancer, and this is much more problematic actually, because Mars is debilitated. So again, that heavy level of passive aggression. And Venus in Cancer has a big issue. We're not accommodating and flexible as we are in Gemini. Venus in Cancer is where we overgive. We're like, I feel mad, so I'll just keep mothering you, and maybe that will make it better. And of course, it never does, and it creates more tension. So rather than the sexual energy that can occur with Venus and Mars in Gemini, this becomes a lot of unspoken anger and passive aggression that can occur. Especially in Astrology, where it's the clinging star. It's a star where we're very attached and we have trouble pulling out of that attachment. Hopefully our grounded communication can pull us through that. And the fact that we are, past some of the zealotry of Rahu being obsessed with Jupiter, and the Sun and Moon in Gemini also offering us that flexibility and accommodation can help at that time. So Saturn retrograde period. We have Venus going retrograde July 22nd. And all of these transits, of course, I'll talk about as they come, but this is sort of an overview of the year and what's going to be coming up. And, I didn't actually speak about this at the beginning, but I have a friend who's made a planner for the year that's based on the moon. And it's in two different time zones. It's in a Pacific time zone and Eastern time zone. So you have an opportunity to kind of plan things around the cycles of the new and full moon, which is really the natural calendar, right? The natural calendar comes from these cycles. And when we look in other cultures, particularly India, all the holidays fall on these new and full moons, because that's when we're setting off a cycle, not on a Monday or on a Sunday or whatever, however you look at the week, but from the quality of when does the light start to grow? When does my inner light, my moon, my mind want to expand into growing something? And when am I shedding and letting go? And so I'll show that at the end, or I'll attach a picture to the video to show that particular planner. But this is a good way to write down these dates, and really note them so that when they come up, you're not surprised, and you're not just kind of waiting to find out when the forecast comes, but you have some awareness around what the year looks like, and you can kind of make your goals set around that if you choose to. So we're moving towards this July 22nd. Oh, here we are. Venus retrograde, joining Mars again in Leo this time. And Venus going retrograde, for most, in terms of the quality of Venus, it's about our relationships and it's about our happiness. More than anything, Venus is about our happiness. And we get our happiness from other people, right? That's how we feel. We feel as though our engagement with other people is what brings us happiness. Venus running through that Cancer bout, particularly joined with Mars, can give us a lot of feelings of being bereft. We've given. How come we haven't gotten return? Venus in Leo brings us to that state of being very high and mighty and like we deserve things, this entitlement quality. And again, joined with Mars. So here there's much more sexual energy with Leo, but that can also bring us feelings that aren't good, right? If we're using sex as a way to bypass problems that we're having in a relationship, that's obviously not positive either. So Venus retrograde is giving us a rethink. Old relationships tend to surface when Venus is retrograde, or old relationship problems in your current relationship tend to resurface. And she's going to retrograde back into Cancer. We're going to have this cycle until September 3rd. So I'm going to skip to September 3rd, and we're actually going to see Mercury go retrograde too in this time. But maybe I'll stop at Mercury retrograde along the way. Mercury really wants us to learn our lessons also. So that's August 23rd. So we'll go a few more days here and we'll get to Mercury retrograde. So now Venus and Mercury are retrograde. These are our two relational planets, right? These are how we engage with other people, through communication and through relating. And when they're both retrograde, we're revisiting a lot in this regard, particularly since Leo is involved now with Mercury. Mars has moved out of Leo at this point and is now in Virgo. But Mars was actually doing very well in Leo. Mars is where we're very disciplined in Leo. We have a lot of courage and integrity. Here we have the ruler of Virgo, Mercury retrograde, and we're in a place where our Mars energy is just organizing everything, trying to make everything perfect and neat, and that can be problematic also. Mercury here in Leo can tend to feel like it knows everything and it always has something to say. And the sun here is we feel empowered. The sun is in his own sign. There's a lot of power here. So this Mercury retrograde cycle is starting off where we might feel a lot of power, a lot of agitation, and need to clean the house and organize everything. And going back to those feelings we had in Cancer. I give and I give and I give and I never get. We didn't spend that long with Venus in Leo. So it's gone right back into Cancer. It's like, oh gosh, okay, I don't get enough. Why when I give and give and give, do I not receive in return? So this is going to be a cycle where we recognize that. And September 3rd will come before we get to Mercury turning direct. So Venus will be direct September 3rd. And we'll have forward motion. Maybe we learned something. Maybe we discovered the ways in which we were being a little bit too clingy through Aslesha, a little bit too mothering, and we weren't allowing ourselves to use this transit instead for our emotions and our feelings and our receptivity, because Venus can be very receptive in Cancer. There's a quality of, really being able to receive love if we're with somebody who's willing to give it, and also being really able to, understand love in this way where it's not so conditional. And of course, Venus is meant to be conditional. We're meant to have conditions within our relationship, but we also need to have some quality of unconditionalness throughout that. The overall riding experience of our relationships needs to be one where there are conditions because our needs need to be met. But we also need to be able to hold space for one another as we go through our ups and downs, and know that someone's not always going to show up with their end of the bargain, right? That sometimes someone might be sick, or someone might be depressed, or someone might be going through something and not be able to pull through as much as we'd like them to. Another thing to note is that Saturn is giving drishti to this Mercury retrograde. to the Venus and Mars that were there and everything. So there's this kind of cold stare from Saturn reminding us of all of society's problems, the bigger picture, as opposed to just our own personal kingdom, but also reminding us about commitment, what we're committed to. So Mercury will end his retrograde September 15th. So we have 15th coming, and we see Mercury direct, and we'll find that we might go back to that kingly nature of knowing what we're going to say and being very empowered in our speech. But we might also have learned something in the retrograde cycle and learned that, you know, not everybody is looking for us to be the leader, and that listening is important. And knowing what is worth our time and what is not worth our time, right? This is a big theme of the whole Saturn retrograde cycle. What is worth our time? What is not worth our time? Well, not just in what we physically do and commit to in our own lives, but what we bother to express to others, what we bother to use our leadership towards with the sun. You know, what is worth that? And what do other people even need or want from us in that regard? Or are we wasting our breath? And we see when Mercury goes retro or goes direct, the moon is actually joined Mars for that day. So there can be a little ire as we first move forward that can occur here. But also we can see that the direct motion of Mercury can help find some positive outlet for that Mars energy, some discernment around what we want to direct our attention to and our action towards in order to organize our kingdom, which is us, right? Ultimately, it's us. And we see the nodes are inching closer to moving out of this Aries Libra axis. So that quality of selfishness versus relationships is starting to shift. So here we are, September 15th, and we're moving into, oh, and we missed Jupiter going retrograde on September 4th. I skipped that. So I'll go back. A lot of dates to work with here. So September 4th, we have Jupiter moving retrograde. And this is going to be until December 30th. This is kind of late for Jupiter. Often Jupiter's retrograde cycle matches more with Saturn's and is more summer, you know, right after Saturn goes retrograde, we'll find that Jupiter will. So this is kind of a later cycle for this. And this is when we start to run back over our beliefs, run back over what we were thinking before. And it's not going to run so far back that it will hit the node. But there's this quality of, you know, particularly as we see that happens on a day when the moon is joined, you know, what about our ideas around self-strengthening are missing the part where we need others is really the big theme for us to recover and rediscover with Jupiter. You know, how strong are you by yourself? You could be Hercules, you know, you could be the strongest man in the world, and you'll never be able to defeat a huge army of people. There's a point where we all need others, even those who are very strong. And also, what's the point of being strong if we're not helping other people, if we're not using that strength in service of everyone, which is something Saturn is teaching us through Aquarius, and something we've been learning through this Rahu-Ketu axis. So serving society and also serving others, serving other people. And that's the highest emanation of our strength, is using it in service of something good and helpful, not just self-serving. Aries can be very self-serving. So we need to remember that. So that will be until December 30th. And the solar eclipse with our nodes, October 14th. Let's see, let's get here. October 14th. We still have the node technically in Libra and Aries here, right? They're still in these are the true nodes. So there's the mean nodes where they're averaged out because the nodes have kind of a wobble. They don't move in steady, consistent beat. And because they're Chayagraha, because they're not actually seen, the measurements can be different because they aren't actual bodies moving. So these are the true nodal shifts, and some astrologers use the mean. But we have Ketu at this very barely still in Chitra in Libra, and we have Rahu still here in Ashwini, and we have our moon coming into conjunction with our sun in Virgo, and I must be very many hours past this, yeah. So let's move back to earlier in the day, and we have our moon and sun together, and the node is still here, but it's eclipsing our sun here in Virgo. This is where we're not very powerful, right? The sun is in Virgo, where we're more obsessed with the details than the big picture, which is hard for leadership. It's moving into debilitation in Libra, where we're accommodating everybody else and having trouble with our own power, our own vision. But Mercury is joined, and he's not only the ruler of Virgo, he's exalted here in Virgo. So we have a capacity for this new moon eclipse, this last solar eclipse of this Libra Aries cycle, but one that's taking us into the Virgo cycle. So it's bringing us into that. The nodes move backwards. So Ketu's moving into Virgo, Rahu's moving into Pisces. And this solar eclipse is shifting that for us, because even though these are in Virgo and this is still technically in Libra, it's carrying that energy into the Virgo where the actual new moon is happening. And it's an opportunity to bridge that energy. And the bridge is Chitra. Chitra is the architect. It's the beautiful one. It's the gem that comes from being cut, or the pearl that comes from the pressure of the oyster. So it's not raw natural beauty. It's beauty that comes from time and craftsmanship, having created something beautiful. And in the Virgo part of this star, where the luminaries will be with Mercury, although Mercury is in Hasta, we see ourselves physically building things. I mean, it's ruled by the divine architect. It's ruled by Vastar, who is the sort of primordial energy of this architecture. And then there's Maya, who's the architect for the Asuras, the beings without light, that creates illusion and delusion. And then there's and fantasy, right? What we want things to be like, even though we're not taking into account all the reality. And then there's Vishwakarma, who creates for the Devas, who is, we're moving more towards the light. We're moving more towards the higher principles and qualities that we're wanting. And so in this placement, we see that there's physical structures that are needing to be built. On the Virgo side, there's like the organizational quality of the architect, maybe where you draw the blueprints, and make it a physical plan, because it's a mental earth sign, but still physical. And then the star moves into Libra. And of course, in the node's case, it moves back into Virgo. But in Libra, it's where we're making these things work for people, right? You could have the most beautiful building on earth, but if it's not functional, if it's not going to bring people together, then its beauty is for nothing, right? It can't just be in tune with the natural world and be perfect in all these different ways. It has to actually also work for people and their need to connect, which is what Libra is about. Their need to connect harmoniously and with beauty and grace and charm. And so the nodes are teaching us this backwards. First, we have that social need, and then we go into building it. But the luminaries will be moving forward. And so this is where we're going to first start to find our shift into our new nodal axis. So we have our lunar eclipse, and the new nodal axis will happen November 28th. We'll get there in a minute, but we have our 2 weeks later, our lunar eclipse, where we get that other energy. And in the lunar eclipse, we have the moon in Aries across from the sun in Libra. And we see now the luminaries are joining the nodes again, right? This one, it was over here in Virgo, giving us a taste of where it's going. And here we have them back in Libra. We have the sun debilitated, so the opposite of what we had in April before Akshaya Tritiya, a debilitated sun with Ketu, the thing that's pulling us away But what's interesting about this is K2 is where all of our wisdom resides, right? It's where we're intelligent. Rahu's where we're new. We're freshmen. We're making all the mistakes. We don't know what we're doing. We're toddlers, really. And so the exaltation of the sun at that April date was being eclipsed by our noviceness, and our eagerness and our obsession. The debilitation of the sun is being eclipsed by our wisdom, our knowledge, and all that we've seen and done before. So it's different. And it's our final hurrah with this axis. So we get to really see the ways in which we give away our power. Libra is not inherently a debilitated sign, right? Just like Aries is not an inherently exalted sign. It's the sun in this place that matters. And the sun is our power. It's our authority. It's our connection to source. It's our consciousness. If our consciousness is coming from our social desire to fit in, get along, and make friends, we're in trouble. Of course, we need those accommodating qualities, Mercury, Venus. We need to be able to do those things. Saturn is exalted here because we need to be able to commit to other people. But we don't want our source of power to come from them. There's a difference. K2 teaching us the old lessons here. Join Mercury, who's doing very well in Libra with his accommodating communication and intellect, and join Mars, where he's the ruler of Aries, where the moon is. Our anger at other people can come up. Again, that same thing that happened when Mars is in Taurus, where it's like, you're the cause of my lack of discipline. It's your fault that I'm not strong, right? And we fight in Mars, in Libra. And he's giving drishti to this moon here and saying, you need to be strong again, don't give away all your power. Remember to be strong. Remember to individuate when you need to. And we need to with our sun, and we need to with our Mars, but we don't need to with our Mercury, and we don't need to with our Venus. And Jupiter's still retrograde, Saturn's still retrograde. So there's still a lot of this latent energy of our wisdom and our commitment. Jupiter and Saturn teach us the long lessons, the hard lessons, but retrograde, they internalize them. They don't manifest them out. So this is the last hurrah there. And Jupiter is giving that drishti. It's our beliefs coming into play about our strength and it's our last pitch here. Like, is it about me? Is it about others? And the answer is it's both, right? It's both. You need to be able to get up in the morning and do your yoga practice or whatever you do to strengthen yourself. You need to be able to sit in meditation. You need to be able to take care of your physical body. Other people aren't going to take care of your physical body for you. But you also need to be able to care for other people. And you also need to be able to compromise. And you also need to be able to be flexible. And you also need to care about harmony, care about getting along, not just with each other, but with everyone. And if even one person is flailing and without, then it throws the whole balance off for everyone else. Then whatever you think you have, you don't have, because someone somewhere is with nothing. So somehow we've done it wrong, right? And this is the ultimate lesson we have here. And then our nodal axis will shift November 28th. So 1 month later, we have our nodes moving out into Pisces and Virgo. Now, this is a huge shift, much like the Saturn and the Jupiter. This is a big one because these are 1.5 transits. They last for a really long time. They are, this is going to be here till June 2025. So for a very long time, we're going to be experiencing this new shift. These nodes actually do better in the opposite placement with Rahu in Virgo and Ketu in Pisces, because Rahu is airy. It's very Vata and it's very spraying out again. And while here we're spraying out fire and ire, here we're spraying out emotions, fantasies, delusions. We're obsessed with escaping, obsessed with checking out, obsessed with spirit. And here we're trying to dive deep into the place that is earth. And it's very hard to drill into earth. It's a lot harder than it is to drill into water. It's hard to go down through our stuck material energy, where we're very attached to things and to the concrete. And we're trying to drill down deep into that and find our wisdom enough to pinpoint what's wrong and what's angsting us. And this is another issue with K2 and Virgo, is that Virgo's where we're already pretty nitpicky. We're already a little disgusted because nothing's ever perfect and nothing will ever be perfect. And it's interesting that as it shifts, we have Venus in the final degrees because the nodes again move backwards. So K2's in these final degrees and Venus is in these final degrees, and Venus is debilitated here. And often Venus will have something helping her debilitation, like Mercury being next door in exchange of signs or joined, because Mercury and Venus tend to travel close. But because of that retrograde cycle, that didn't happen. So Venus is all alone over here in her debilitation, where she's already picking on other people. And we just finished our solar eclipse here. And I didn't mention that Venus was debilitated in that, but, you know, we're already kind of having that last, like, oh, I need to take my own stand. And we're, you know, feeling critical towards our own beauty, our own happiness, our own capacity to enjoy life, which we project on other people and say, you're keeping me from happiness. You're not perfect enough. Your shirt has got a stain on it. And K2's here going, yep, stains, all stains, you know, and feeling disgusted with that. But as Venus moves out, which is going to happen, we can see right away because she's so late degrees, she moves into her own sign of Libra, where we immediately find grace there and immediately find our desire, again, to get along and to accommodate. So she's got a strong bout here. Venus doesn't do well from Cancer through Virgo. It's rough. We're, you know, oh, why me? No one gives to me. I'm always giving. Here, I'm entitled. I deserve. And then here, nitpicky. So it's, you know, we wait till she gets to Libra. It's like between Gemini and Libra is where the relief is, right? Those are the relief point where it's like, okay, yes, we want to get along. We want to get along, right? That's what happiness is getting along, not being right, not over giving and not getting in return, not being entitled, and not picking apart every little detail of something. And here's where K2 has that opportunity to find our old past disgruntledness about perfection and about organization and about the details. Now, there is an opportunity here to be very precise in our details because K2 has precision. It points to it. It ends in a point. It ends in a tail. That Rahu's, wow, the big mouth open. K2 has a point of perfection, but there can be a lot of disgruntled energy here. And particularly, of course, it'll depend if this is your rising sign or if this is, you know, where you have planets, you have your moon here, you know, these kind of things can be difficult. But this is setting that axis off where we have to, and the goal of the nodes is to bring them together, you know, in our own life path, wherever the nodal axis is, they're always across from each other. It's to bring the wisdom of K2 to inform the new karma we're opening up with Rahu. K2's old karma, Rahu's new karma. So we're wanting to open up new karma. But we can't do it if we don't have the other information and we're cut off from that information. So we need K2 to engage. We need Rahu to, you know, find out, to listen. And we need that harmony to occur. And it's harder in these transits than it is in your own chart, because in your own chart, it's a lifelong path. And at some point you'll run the transits, you'll run the reverse returns where Rahu goes where K2 is and things like this, and you'll mature with that energy. In the transits, we only have this year and a half to do that. And for many of us, it's, you know, it feels foreign. It's not where our natal placement is for these things. And we might have planets in these places that might be affected by it. And for each person, it'll really depend on what house it is. It's huge. You know, I'm a Taurus rising, so it's a nice shift to go from Rahu in the 12th to Rahu in the 11th, because Rahu in the 12th is like obsession with escape and loss and disappointment. And so it's nice to, you know, focus on community and groups of people and higher ambitions. So it will depend. If this, again, if you're a Virgo rising, it's not going to feel very good to move in K2 to move in on you, on your rising sign, or if you have your moon there. So these are important things to understand. And again, I'll do a report for all 12 signs on this at that time as we move into it. And K2 and Chitra specifically will be focusing us on the architecture that we're built upon, you know, the blueprints even that we've created to get this harmony that we didn't get, or that we were trying to heal old karma around in the past cycle. In that past cycle. So that's going till June 2025. And then we have Mercury retrograde December 13th until January 2nd. So we have 2 more weeks, and we have our Mercury retrograde here. And it's actually right after a new moon, so I'll go back a day to show us our new moon in Scorpio, where of course the moon is debilitated, joined Mars, the ruler, which will help the debilitation, where we learn how to face our fears courageously. And it's in Jaistha where we really do. We face our fears courageously. As well, by Indra, the king of the gods. He goes in, he creates the problems, but he also solves them. He's the hero in this. So we end, that's our last new moon of the year, and we'll come into our courage through our fears. That will be potent. Saturn will be giving drishti to this. Actually, Mars will be giving drishti to Saturn. Saturn will be giving drishti here. Saturn gives a 10th house drishti. Mars gives a 4th house drishti to the situation. Jupiter and Venus will be right across from each other. So we'll be, again, learning the lessons of our individuation versus our accommodation. Jupiter can be kind of high and mighty. Venus can be very relational. And together they're the gurus. They're the teachers. And they teach us that you need both. It's like yoga and tantra. You know, you need to accept that you have a body here and that you didn't just come in this body just to get out of it. But you also need to accept that you are more than just your body and more than just your emotions and experiences, and that there's something higher to move towards. Both of those things are necessary for happiness and for good beliefs, quite honestly. So we can't just be yogis and dissociate from the world and not understand that we're here and that there's other humans here. It's very easy to be alone on a mountaintop and feel good in your beliefs, but you might miss people, other people. And some people that might be their life calling, you know, and other people more worldly calling. But for most of us, we need both of those things to find true happiness and true peace. And this will be facing all those fears of, yeah, but when we have other people, we lose them. They die, they go away from us. We can't control them. Nope, we can't. We can only control ourselves. We can only fight our own battles, our own dragons, our own demons, and return the emotions to the earth, which is what happens in the story with Indra, where he fights the demon that swallows all the waters of the earth, and he has to return the waters to the earth. The waters are the emotions. We have to return them to the earth. So that's our last new moon, setting off the cycle, and then we end in our Mercury retrograde yet again. But was our communication good? Was our mind founded on the right beliefs? Because again, it's in Sagittarius. Just like we're starting off this year with Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, we're ending the year with Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. Again and again and again, we have to go back to this because it's one of the places we're the most caught off in our world. So much of our beliefs are founded on experiences we've had, experiences other people have had around us, experiences our families have had, our lineages, experiences from past lives. If you know, and if you are Vedic inclined, you believe in those, but everything that's happened on Earth is affecting what we believe. Our beliefs are not pure and true and right just because we read them somewhere or just because they make sense in our brain. Our brain, we use very small capacity of. Our beliefs are limited. And particularly our capacity to categorize those beliefs, put them into order, and share them is limited. And when we just say the spiritual maxim and we just say the high thing, just like I was just talking about with Jupiter and Venus, we're missing the point. Because the point of communication began with actually saying something to someone. Early communication was not high spiritual beliefs, right? It might have been in telepathy, you know, that there might have been that quality in the golden age, in the enlightened age. But when we think about, you know, drawing pictures, it's like picture of an animal that we kill or that we, you know, use for this purpose, or picture of storm, you know, like the pictorial quality, it had maybe metaphor and maybe higher, you know, purpose, but ultimately we need to communicate with each other. That's why we would even bother trying to talk to one another. Once we moved out of that concept of just being able to share these ideas in our head without words, once we created words, they were to share things with people and not just ideas, you know. And if they are to share ideas, we need the other person to understand us. So if you go to another country or you meet somebody from another country in your own country, it works best to speak slowly and maybe even change your syntax to understand. The more languages you speak, the more you will understand how to shift things so that the other person can understand you. If you're talking and talking over everyone and they're not there with you, then what's the point? You could say all the most beautiful things on earth, but they're not there with you. Or maybe they understand what you're saying and then they feel guilty that they're not as high, that they're not able to embody that, when the person speaking usually can't embody that either. In today's day, in our Kali Yuga, very few teachers do fully embody what they share. They are also here learning, and they might have the capacity to understand, and they might have had an insight or many, and they might have the words to share, but it doesn't mean they're fully embodying it. I have to correct people all the time who tell me that something I've shared somehow indicates that I'm enlightened. And I know that's not what it means. It means that I understand something, and I hope to be a bridge of that information, not somebody pretending to be somewhere I'm not. And that's the issue with Mercury and Sagittarius. And that's the lesson we're learning this year, starting off this year with. And it's the lesson we're ending the year with, rethinking how much you think you know and what your beliefs are even founded on and where you're sharing it from. Are you sharing it to control? Are you sharing it to convince? Are you sharing it to be right? Because to question your own beliefs would be challenging. And is your communication reflective of a capacity to listen and also learn? Because often with Mercury and Sagittarius, we don't listen and learn. So starting off listening and ending listening. And Saturn is now direct. I missed that. Okay, November 4th was when Saturn went direct. So we missed that in our conversation here somewhere. But Saturn's direct quality, of course, is going to influence all of this. That drishti on here, we're more aware of what we're committed to. When Saturn moves direct, our commitments are clear. We've thought about it, and now we're ready to move forward again, and that's important. And Jupiter, as I said, isn't going to be direct until till December 30th. So that's our final once I can get there, our final transit is Jupiter going direct right before the new year. Oh, and Mercury retrogrades back into Scorpio here. I missed that as well. So really asking us to look at our relations and our fears of those beliefs, because Mercury's crossing over this Gandanta point between Jaista and Mula. So the root of our beliefs, and coming back here and questioning them, and look, joined Venus relationships in Scorpio, where we try to control other people. We try to control our relationships, where we are too emotional in our relating and feisty. And Mercury again saying, hey, what kind of communication am I using? Am I using it to control people? So everything I just said, but really moving it into the Scorpio zone, where our communication is also not very intelligent. This axis, and I talked about this a lot in this last report I did, but this is of course a different one, so you might not have heard that. Scorpio to Sagittarius is an important place to understand, because here's the end of the point of relating to others is Scorpio, where we come face to face with our fears, everything we've learned about other people, and being the leader, being detail-oriented, trying to fix everything through perfectionism, relating to others, becoming accommodating, and moving into our fears and facing our fears. Everything comes to a pit stop between the water and the earth and the fire signs, called the Gandanta point. It's a knot. It's a karmic knot, and it needs to be untied or jumped over. When it's jumped over, we miss something. And so Mercury's going back over the point, saying there's something we missed even further beyond our beliefs. It's not just a spiritual philosophy I need. It's my fear. My fear is at the root of that. The root of my beliefs is my fear. And if I can face my fear, then I can release my emotions, and I can come with more clarity into what I believe and see it with more discernment. And Mars here in Mula also having crossed the Gandanta point can be that warrior that rips up things by the roots, which is where we've just had our new moon as I make this video in December of 2022, right before the new year. So this need to return to this place again is very interesting and very compelling. And yet we have, more forward motion with Saturn, and now we have this forward motion with Jupiter, where we have courage and capacity to make things happen in the world that we want to see, to be that change we want to be in the world, but to do so with integrity. And the integrity requires relational integrity, not just personal integrity. We are not just ships at sea. As much as we learned that while Saturn was in Capricorn, we are needing other ships also at sea, right? To help us. If we're just completely alone, then we're lost. We're lost also. So powerful ending to the year with Jupiter going direct and Mercury retrograde. And he will be retrograde until the 2nd of 2024. So as soon as the new year begins, we'll have direct motion with Mercury as well. And we'll be able to, and I can move forward there just to show. We'll have a moment in time where everything's direct and really, perhaps the cycles that we go through where we are reflecting, where we are, because retrograde is not actually where the planets move backwards, right? Retrograde is where the planet is slowed down to the point where our perspective here on Earth is that it seems like it's going backwards. All of this is us on Earth and our perspective of it, because the sun doesn't move, right? So we're in this place seeing these things move through these different places. And all of this is founded on the us, right? And we're collectively agreeing upon a lot in order to make all of this true. So when we go through these retrograde cycles, when we go through these eclipses where our luminaries are shadowed, eaten by the Chayagraha, we're being given opportunities to reflect, because a lot is forward motion. A lot is happening all the time, and we're making things happen. And we need to stop and pause and reflect and say, am I doing that right? Is that correct? Is that how it's supposed to go? Is that how it's, is that belief true? Is that commitment really where my time should be spent? Is that thought I have, or that notion I have, is that really right? And it's important that we are able to know that, for ourselves, not just being told by some other person, by some other teacher. Knowing our beliefs for ourselves is also a quality of Jupiter in Aries, embodying our beliefs. So I hope this is helpful for you, and that you have a blessed 2023. And I will put in the comments a snapshot or a link to my friend's moon planner, because it's a very beautiful way to kind of lay out all the dates in something. And then within that, you can fill in your own, whether it's just your own thoughts, emotions, prayers, or whether it's actual to-do lists, however you like to go forward with yourself. But this quality of Rahu Ketu moving into Virgo, is going to be showing us that need to remember our organization skills also. The need to categorize is here on Earth. We can't just merge with everything, because we need to have some semblance of what's happening. Just like we can't just be these high beliefs without having some relativity with our reality here on Earth. And so, I'll offer that to you as well. And I offer you a blessed 2023. You can go to my website, www.radhahomeyoga.com. I have my new website coming out for the new year, and book a reading if you'd like to see how these transits affect you. Namaste.